Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, is the most famous and respected person in the entire world. If Jesus had a social media account, he would have been the most followed person on earth now. If not on internet, but he is the only person to have a lot of followers on planet Earth. Being the most influential person, he left a legacy by reflecting himself as the deliverer of salvation. According to the Bible, Jesus' ministry lasted for 3 years. Within that 3 years ministry, Jesus taught the world about the coming world order, a world governed by the God himself. This teaching of Jesus took by storm over the centuries and spread it across the world, making him the founder of world's most followed religion, the Christianity. And of course, he is worshipped across the world, personified as the prophesied Jewish Messiah. And yeah, everybody knows what Jesus looks like, as he is the most painted figure in the Western art and recognized across the world for having long hairs and cool beard, wearing a long robe with long sleeves, often white, with a mantle or a shawl which is often red or blue. For centuries, Jesus has been portrayed in the paintings as this. Then later, Jesus was adapted into the pop culture and also been portrayed in the movies, comics, and sitcoms.
So, I guess we'll split the bill 13 ways?
In all of this adaptation, he has been portrayed with that same iconic beard and hair, either on a cross or either wearing a white long robe with a mantle. Over the years, Jesus has been portrayed as Western European, black, even as an Asian. But most of the famous paintings resembled Jesus to be an Italian with white skin, blonde hairs, and blue eyes. So here's the question for you. Did Jesus really look like this? If Jesus did not look like this, how come these images of him got so famous that one can recognize him even in a toast? Well, this image of Jesus comes from the ancient Eastern Roman Empire period or the historical Byzantine era. 4th century onwards, the Byzantine representation of Jesus were more symbolic than historically accurate. These symbolism were all about meanings and representation of Jesus to a cosmic ruler. Now, look at this image. This is an image engraved on the ceilings of the altar mosaic of the Santa Pudenziana Church in Rome. And now look at this image. Does it have any kind of similarity? Yes, it does have. So Jesus' image is based on an enthroned emperor, just as we can see here. This image is of the famous statue of long-haired and bearded Olympian Zeus, the Greek god, on a throne. This image of Zeus was pretty well known and famous that the Roman Emperor Augustus made a copy of himself, had him in the same style. So, the early Byzantine artists wanted to represent Christ's heavenly rule as similar to the Greek mythical cosmic king and portrayed Jesus as a younger version of Zeus, wearing a golden toga and holding a prop like the scrolls or pointing his hands to heaven to represent the poured out blessings. These images was never to show Jesus as a man, but to make theological points about who Jesus was as Christ, King, Judge, and Divine Son, the Son of God, God the Creator. These images evolved over time to the standard of today's portrayal of Jesus that we recognize. Of course, not all images of Jesus agree or conform to the fact of dominant portrayal of his image in Western art. In fact, many different cultures around the world have depicted him visually at least as one of their own. Cultures tend to portray prominent religious figures to look like the dominant racial identity, and that is how images of Black Jesus, Mexican Jesus, Korean Jesus, and Italian Jesus appeared over time. Over centuries, some possible related relics surfaced displaying a clear image of Jesus, but experts dismissed it as fake. The organization and museums preserving it has also referred it not to be an actual relic, but can be used as an icon. So, if it is fake, then why at the first place it even exists? Experts claim this to be an exposed medieval forgery or fabrication. It's a part of larger phenomenon that has been around since Jesus himself, of attempting to acquire or to produce objects that are part of Jesus' body, life, and ministry. for the purposes of either legitimizing his existence and the claims made about him, or in some cases, harnessing his miraculous powers. But some relics found in some Eastern Europe and Middle Eastern regions can be termed as legitimate archaeological discovery. And these were some of the earliest non-artistic representation of Jesus, which dates to the mid-3rd century AD, which is actually 2 centuries after his death. These paintings were found in the ancient catacombs of Saint Domitilla in Rome, and this one from the Syrian city of Dura Europos. Not so artistic, but these paintings were authentic and brilliantly made to portray his role among the apostles as well as his physical appearances. These paintings depicted Jesus as a mere human with not so close similarity with today's portrayal of Jesus. In this painting, Jesus being depicted as a good shepherd, a young, short-haired, beardless man with a lamb around his shoulder. And look at this painting, which dates back to AD 235. In this one, Jesus appears as a beardless young man of authoritative and dignified bearing. He is depicted dressed in the style of a young philosopher, with close-cropped hair and wearing a tunic and pallium, and he is healing a paralytic patient. So these earliest depictions clearly intend to directly represent Jesus as himself, not as any Greek god. From this, it is evident that some early Christians paid no heed to the historical context of Jesus being a Jew, and visualized him solely in terms of their own social context, as a quasi-heroic figure, without supernatural attributes like a halo behind or over the head. These paintings have some clear theological implications. While some Christians thought Jesus should have the beautiful appearance of a young classical hero. In the Bible's New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the accounts of Jesus' life and his teachings. And it says that Jesus was a Jew who was born around 4 BC in Bethlehem and raised in the town of Nazareth in Galilee. These writings doesn't mention anything about Jesus' physical appearances or any physical features, aside from some reference to the clothing that he and his disciples wore. Well, is Bible always silent about the physical appearances of the characters mentioned in it? Actually, Bible does mention about the character both Moses, who led the Israelites out of Egypt, and David, who was one of the glorious king of Israel, were described as being handsome figures in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. So what about Jesus? Didn't he have any attractive physical attributes? Well, this comes from the book of Revelation, more of another prophetic symbolism. It offers a clue that Jesus' skin was a darker hue and that his hair was woolly in texture. The hairs of his head, it says, were white as white wool, white as snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like a burnished bronze, refined as in a furnace. Author of the book John writes this as a visualization when Jesus appeared to him with the apocalyptic literature known as the Revelation. In the Old Testament book of Isaiah says that Christ's appearance was unremarkable. He had no form nor comeliness that we should look upon him, nor beauty that we should delight in him. This is a prophetical symbolism or sign about the Jewish Messiah, which Christians claim to be Jesus the Christ. If it is so, then this is a clear depiction of Jesus that he wasn't attractive, that one would listen to him and may follow him. But he is the Emmanuel, meaning God amongst the humans. Okay, so Bible tells us virtually nothing about what he looked like, except that he did not stand out in any particular way. For an instance, when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane before the crucifixion, Judas Iscariot had to point Jesus out to the Roman guard among the disciples, presumably because they all appeared similar to one another, which tells us that Jesus was just another Jew who did not have any kind of standout feature. Solely gives us a hint that he looked like an average Jewish man in his early 30s. Jesus' facial features and physical appearances being one of the greatest mystery, in 2001, the retired medical artist Richard Neave led a team of Israeli and a British forensic anthropologist and computer programmers in creating a new image of Jesus based on an ancient Israeli skull which carbon dated to the 1st century AD. They came up with this as the final computerized facial construction of an ancient Jewish man. He did not claim it was Jesus' face, It was simply meant to prompt people to consider this as the ancient facial feature of an average Jewish man from the time and place of Jesus, since we are never told he looked distinctive. Some further studies and research done by Joanne Taylor using some archaeological remains, historical texts, and ancient Egyptian funerary art gives a conclusion that, like most of the people in Judea and Egypt around the 1st century period, Jesus also most likely had brown eyes, dark brown to black hair, and olive brown skin. He may have stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall, the average man's height at that time. Jesus being portrayed as a carpenter could have probably thin, but somewhat with an average muscular build based on the physical labor that he came from. Finally, I would conclude that I am skeptical about the depiction of Jesus that show him as being very handsome. Because if Jesus were handsome, then people who wrote Gospel would have mentioned so, as they did for Prophet Moses and King David. What are your thoughts on this? Leave a comment below and let us know.